Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to drop in here and read the first chapter, the first full chapter of our new novel, The Game of Silence. After reading this, you should go on to your Google Classroom and do the assignment, the little quiz there, just to check in, make sure you did it. So let's get started. Nibin, summer. It's not changing. There we go. Summer. 1. The Raggedy Ones. When they were close enough to touch bottom with their paddles, the people poured out of the nearly swamped canoes. The grown-ups held little ones, and the little ones held even smaller ones. There were so many people jammed into each boat that it was a wonder they had made it across. The grown-ups, the ones who wore clothes, bunched around the young. A murmur of pity started among the people who had gathered on shore when they heard Omakayas' shout, for the children had no clothing at all. They were naked. In a bony, hungry, anxious group, the people from the boats waded ashore. They looked at the ground fearfully and in shame. They were like skinny herons with long poles for legs and clothes like drooping feathers. Only their leader, a tall old man wearing a turban of worn cloth, walked with a proud step and held his head up as a leader should. He stood calmly, waiting for his people to assemble. When everyone was ashore and a crowd was gathered expectantly, he raised his thin hand and commanded silence with his eyes. Everyone's attention was directed at him as he spoke. "Brothers and sisters, we are glad to see you. Daga, please open your hearts to us. We have come from very far away." He hardly needed to urge kindness. Immediately, families greeted cousins, old friends, lost relatives, those they hadn't seen in years. Fishtail, a close friend of Omakayas' father, clasped the old chief in his arms. The dignified chief's name was Miskopines, Red Thunder, and he was Fishtail's uncle. Blankets were soon draping bare shoulders, and the pitiful naked children were covered, too, with all the extra clothing that the people could find. Food was thrust into the hungry people's hands, strips of dried fish and bannock bread, maple sugar, and fresh boiled meat. The raggedy visitors tried to contain their hunger, but most fell upon the food and ate wolfishly. One by one, family by family, the poor ones were taken to people's homes. In no time, the jimanan were pulled far up on the beach, and the men were examining the frayed seams and fragile, torn stitching of spruce that held the birch bark to the cedar frames. Omakayas saw her grandmother, her sister, and her mother, each leading a child. Her mother's eyes were wide set and staring with anger, and she muttered explosive words under her breath. That was only her way of showing how deeply she was affected. Still, Omakayas steered clear. Her brother, Pinch, was followed by a tall, skinny boy hastily wrapped in a blanket. He was the son of the leader, Miskopines, and he was clearly struggling to look dignified. The boy looked back in exhaustion, as if wishing for a place to sit and rest. But seeing Omakayas, he flushed angrily and mustered strength to stagger on ahead. Omakayas turned her attention to a woman who trailed them all. One child clutched her ragged skirt. She carried another terribly thin child on a hip. In the other arm, she clutched a baby. The tiny bundle in her arms made no movement and seemed limp, too weak to cry. The memory of her poor baby brother, Niwo, shortened Omakayas' breath. She jumped after the two, leaving the intrigue of the story of their arrival for later, as well as the angry boy's troubling gaze. Eagerly, she approached the woman and asked if she could carry the baby. Here's the picture. The woman handed over the little bundle with a tired sigh. She was so poor that she did not have a cradle board for the baby, or a warm skin bag lined with rabbit fur and moss, or even a trade blanket or piece of cloth from the trader's store. For a covering, she had only a tiny piece of deerskin wrapped into a rough bag. Even Omakayas' dolls had better clothing and better care. Omakayas cuddled the small thing close. The baby inside the bag was bare and smelled like he needed a change of the cattail fluff that served as his diaper. Omakayas didn't mind. She carried the baby boy with a need and happiness that the woman, so relieved to hand the baby over, could not have guessed at. Having lost her own brother, Omakayas took comfort in the baby's tiny weight and light breath. She would protect him, she promised, as they walked. She would keep him company and give him all the love she had stored up but could no longer give to her little brother Niwo. The baby peered watchfully into her eyes. Though tiny and helpless, he seemed determined to live. With a sigh, he rooted for milk, for something, anything. Anxiously, Omakayas hurried toward the camp. The angry boy with his long stick legs and frowning face sat next to Pinch by the fire. He glared up when Omakayas entered the clearing, but then his whole attention returned to the bowl of stew in his hands. He stared into it, tense as an animal. He tried without success to keep from gulping the stew too fast. His hands shook so hard that he nearly dropped the bowl at one point, but with a furious groan he righted himself and attained a forced calm. Straining to control his hunger, he lifted the bowl to his lips and took a normal portion of meat between his teeth. Chewed. Closed his eyes. When Omakayas saw from beneath one half-shut eyelid the gleam of desperation, she looked away. Not fast enough. "What are you staring at?" the boy growled. "Nothing." "Don't even bother with her," said Pinch, delighted to sense an ally with whom he might be able to torment his sister. "She's always staring at people. She's a homely owl." "Weweni gagi gidun," said Angeline, throwing an acorn that hit Pinch square on the forehead. She told her brother to speak with care, then commanded him, "Punia, leave her alone." There's the little angry boy eating his soup. Omakayas was grateful to her big sister. Still, she flushed and turned away. She was embarrassed by her brother's teasing, and she felt it wrong to witness such hunger in the visitor. She could tell the boy was proud, and it had hurt him to have his ravenous eating observed. Sometimes the things he did were so off. Besides that, she was, as usual, mad at Pinch. Sometimes the things he did were so awful that they instantly made her blood boil. At those times, she had to run away before she hit him or screamed at him. Luckily, there were other small children to occupy her time. The scrawny little wide-eyed children dove into the food. They ate all they could, and even licked one another's faces clean. When there was nothing in sight, they begged for more. At last, their bellies full, they fell asleep right where they sat, clutching some tattered old skins around them. That was when the woman, who ate politely and slowly, sighing with gratitude at each bite, spoke to Omakayas' mother, Yellow Kettle. "This baby is not mine," she said. "We have been running for our lives. The Bwanag wiped out our village. We left our gardens, our food caches, all of our kettles, and our makazinan sitting by the doors. Some people even got left behind in this crazy mess. They were captured. That is why we have nothing. I don't know what happened to this baby's mother or father." Omakayas' eyes filled with burning tears. She held the baby closer and let him go only when Mama, with a cooling lullaby and a cup of warm broth, took the baby to feed. That was how Omakayas gained a brother that day, and a cousin too, for the angry boy with bold eyes went to live at the camp that included her Auntie Muskrat and Uncle Albert Lepotre, as well as her girl cousins and her father's friend, Fishtail. From the first, the baby fascinated Omakayas. He was very different from Niwo, and that was good, said Yellow Kettle, for the baby was his own little person. He had his very own spirit and shouldn't be confused with the other. She, of course, never said the name of Niwo. Nobody said the name of those who had died. That was because to say their names would attract the spirits of the dead, even bring them back to visit the living. It was better to let even the most loved ones go along their journey into the next world. Anyway, this baby soon stopped reminding anyone of anybody but himself, for he was clever-eyed with a watchful face and a sharp bow of a mouth that he held in a quizzical line. Mama loved to hold him and to sing to him while looking into his eyes. He needed to hear her baby songs, get used to her voice, she said. But Omakayas, whose arms ached to hold the baby too, understood that Mama needed to hold the new little one for her own healing. Mama even put this baby to her breast and let him nurse. After a while, she said, the baby would cause her body to remember how to make milk. When that happened, said Mama, with a gentle and confident look at the baby's pitiful legs and arms, the baby would rapidly grow fat. Nokomis quickly made the new baby a cradle board, bending a soaked piece of ash for the head guard and scraping a soft piece of fragrant cedar for the back. Nokomis beaded 2 thick velvet bands to hold him against a soft cushion. As it was just the right time of year when the heads of the cattails explode into puffy sticks, Omakayas picked bags of cattail fluff to use as diapers. Once the baby was set inside the sack of the cradle board, he seemed to appreciate the new security and fell instantly asleep. But not for long. Whenever Omakayas turned around from her work, she'd see the baby watching her with such close attention that it seemed as though he was memorizing her every move. Nokomis gave him a nickname to match this sharp-eyed habit. She called him the little Bijins, or baby wildcat, for the way the wild lynx stalks and watches its prey reminded her of the close and intent eyes of the baby. There's Bijins, little baby. One day, as Omakayas was watching Mama and Bijins, she felt her Dede watching her. He sat down next to her. Omakayas' Dede was a prickly man, scratchy and remote sometimes, lost in his thoughts, or even cold as his name, Mikwam, ice. But he was also warm-hearted and kind underneath. Often he seemed not to notice his surroundings at all as he worked on one of his many projects: net, snowshoes, baskets, bows and arrows, traps. Dede could make anything. Suddenly, he would lift his head from whatever he was doing, and Omakayas would realize he had been closely observing the entire family all along. Now was one of those times. Nidanis, he said, his hand warm on her hair, don't be so sad. Soon enough that little baby will be too much for your mama. She'll beg you to help her take care of him. And in the meantime, he went on, excitement in his voice, I have made something for you. Dede put a small bundle into Omakayas' arms, folded her arms around the bundle, and hurried away. Giving gifts, the things he made, always embarrassed him. Omakayas recognized the scrap of hide, now clean and softened, that had first held Bijins. Slowly, she pushed the edges away from a face that made her gasp. She saw beautiful hair, black bead eyes, and a tiny mouth, reddened with vermilion. It was a wonderfully made doll with a red dress of velvet sewn by Dede and beaded by Omakayas' sister. Seeing Omakayas' longing, Dede and Angeline had made her something to hold. I have a good family, Omakayas whispered. Holding the doll to her heart, she entered this precious being into the list of all she loved. And that's the end of chapter 1. Thanks for listening, and we will see you tomorrow.